We are going to follow the money.
Everything you need to know can be understood with this simple phrase: follow the money. And believe me, that's what's happening.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to College Sports Follow the Money, an all-new podcast diving into the critical issues surrounding the big business of college sports. I'm Andrew Monaco, joined by former president of Texas A&M University and former chancellor at the University of Missouri, Dr. Bowen Loftin, and former vice president and general manager of Fox Sports Southwest, Jon Heidtke. From NIL to the transfer portal and opt-outs, to the college football playoff, conference realignment, and more, we tackle the key issues facing college athletics today and into the future.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money! You love this black man!
We welcome you to another edition of College Sports Follow the Money. We're all together, the three of us, Dr. Bowen Loftin, Jon Heidtke, I'm Andrew Monaco. There will be a fourth a little bit later on in this podcast. Mike Perrin will join us. We'll get to him in just a little bit. One of the topics, first of all, howdy, gentlemen. Very nice to see you both.
Howdy.
Always good to see you too.
Jon, I'm going to start with you. Do we or do we not have a contract for the CFP? Some days it's yes, other days it's, hey, to borrow the phrase from Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend.
Not so fast, my friend. I think if you talk to our friends at ESPN, they would tell you they do have an agreement in place, or at least in principle, through their people who've been helping them negotiate that relationship. But it's been interesting that some of the CFP managers have been very quick to say that, again, to your point, not so fast, and are kind of leaving that deal out there. The interesting thing is that ESPN, like any business, if you've think you have an agreement here, it's a certain period of time, you've got to move on and look at other opportunities. And in their world, the NBA television rights are coming up. They just had the All-Star game. All of the muckety-mucks were there talking about what that looks like. So I think you're going to see conversations about that deal picking up steam here as we head toward the playoffs for the NBA. And I thought ESPN was hoping to get this deal done that would preclude them to put that behind them so they could focus on what was going forward. So I think it's just been fascinating that the CFP hasn't, for whatever reason, hasn't come to terms on that or agreed to a deal that's on the table right now.
Well, Jon, is it a problem
ESPN.
with just too many cooks in the kitchen on the CFP side?
I think that's
what's the problem here?
I think that's a lot of it from some people that I've talked to. I think again that there's some particulars that the CFP has to get worked out on the process. I think one was that 5 versus 7 or the 6 versus 6. So, but that was an issue. Is the Pac-12 is simply kind of a disintegrated. I think everybody agreed that the 5-7 model looked better. 7 at-large teams coming in that. So I don't think anybody is concerned about that. I think there's some concerns from some of the ADs that there might be too much consolidation of power under one network if the CFP were to get those rights. So if you think about that, if you looked at the NFL model, which we like to use, that all of a sudden that if you're the NFL and one network had all the playoffs and the Super Bowl, would that dilute the value or depress the value of their other media partners over the course of time? Most likely you would say yes, it would. So I think there's a group out there. I think ESPN, from what I understand, has the right to sublicense games to that. And my guess there would be an appetite for other networks to want to sublicense games from that standpoint. So I think that's an issue that's out there. And then one other topic that's kind of is gaining some steam is that there's still some groups now, do they want to see it go from 12 to 14 or 12 to 16? And does this new agreement have that capability to do it? I think that it does. But I think, again, then it has to just be a majority versus unanimous. So, again, I think there are just some things that are still out there that have not, the T's haven't been crossed, the I's haven't been dotted. But I certainly think being a media guy back in the day, when you think you have an agreement, you want to have an agreement. And I think this thing probably has dragged on that longer than it usually does when you sort of have a tentative deal in place.
My thought is it took so long to get from 2 to 4, then 4 to this 12. But once they did that, it seemed like there was no thinking involved from that. Okay, what do we do after that? Like it's, okay, we came to a decision, stop. And very unfair if that's not the case, but that's the impression that I get. And then, Jon, what I was going to ask you, if Obviously, ESPN wants this because it's great for them and the brand. But to me, does it hurt CFP? Because there could be other players, and now they kind of know the parameters until that deal gets signed. This is what it might cost to spend, this and that. And instead of getting a sub-licensed game, you wonder if there's a player out there that comes in and snatches it.
I think if somebody would have come in and snatched it, that those conversations would have been, I think, probably accelerated quicker from the standpoint. So I don't know if it's that per se. It could be. It just seems again like there's a lot of little things out there that shouldn't be holding a deal like this up, but it is. And again, I think if you look at the makeup of the committee, there are people from the group that are still concerned about conceding too much power to the SEC and the Big Ten through these conversations. And I think this may be their last chance to try to get whatever issues that they have out there on the table potentially addressed in a contractual form.
So if I go back to the future, John, right? If ESPN holds all the rights to the broadcasting, how's that differ from ABC in the 70s and Oklahoma suing them for the CFA in 1980? I didn't mean to do that, but that's just how my brain thinks.
No, it's funny you say that because I think everything kind of goes back to the future in these conversations. But at that point, it was the networks were using the teams. The networks had the deals with the NCAA, and the schools were suing the NCAA to allow them to take not warehouse their rights, but to a restraint of trade through that process. So. Some similarities there for sure, I think again. But I think there are other players through the deal too in this, so it's a little bit different. But again, But the CFP at the end of the day, I think will probably be the most valuable of all that content. And I think again, that's why again, for me as a TV person, just understanding, and again, you always want to have. If you've got three packages, you'd love to have 4 bidders. And so in this particular scenario, I think, again, that if you don't have those other bidders for these rights and ESPN doesn't sublicense them, could that suppress other, does that hurt you down the road, or the unintended consequences when these other networks who are invested in college football today might go other areas and then not be as enamored with the sport when these other deals expire in the future?
John, because of what's happening with the SEC and the Big Ten, but you're talking about different TV partners for them. The SEC is now all ESPN, where the Big Ten, now CBS jumps over there. That's always been Fox. That's the different players in here. Do they want to end at the end of November when the playoffs start and not be a part of that? I always find that interesting of the television partners with those two conferences who are talking about linking together.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, if you're in the sport, you certainly want to have access to the most marquee events at the end of the year, because that allows you, certainly from a sponsorship standpoint, to package your regular season games leading to the championship game. Again, you see what the NFL does is they rotate the Super Bowl around all of their media partners, so they get it every 3rd or 4th year in that process, and that is something that both of these networks do. That's where they make a majority of their money, in that particular process. So the more people you have engaged and invested into it, and being able to showcase that product at the highest level, that's a win. So I think, again, if you're the media partner there. So it's just been interesting that, again, to me, the interesting thing was that it wasn't multiple networks in there. But I do think it's heard from several folks that ESPN does have the ability to sublicense with it at the end of the day. And if you take a page out of what Fox did with the Big Ten network, they were the ones that, basically put all the rights under the Big Ten network, and then were able to sublicense games to Notre Dame, CBS, and others as they jumped into the fold. But it did put Fox in an advantageous position because they were dictating the terms and how that process went.
Dr. Loftin, in the past, college coaches would struggle going to the NFL, and there were times the NFL coaches would go back to college. Right now, there's a pipeline, college coaches, an exodus to the NFL. It's an interesting trend, isn't it?
Well, it is. I'm a great consumer of athletic media, shall we say, both print and otherwise. And the print media lately has been pretty much focused on this. Bleacher Report put out an article just a couple of days ago in our current time here that talks about this a bit and really begins to put out some real questions to ponder here. They point to Nick Saban, arguably the most successful football coach of our era, maybe of all eras, depending how you want to count it, deciding abruptly to retire, and why. He's not really ever come out and said exactly why he's doing it. Maybe he just wants to wear a blue jacket and sell insurance. I don't know, but But my point is, this has happened. Harbaugh winning a national championship, already in conversation before that, but now officially comes out and says, "Hey, I'm going back to the pros. I'm leaving Michigan." You can look back at Kingsbury jumping from college to pro, for example. And it's not just the head coaches, guys. The Bleacher Report talks about some of the coordinators who are moving around right now as well. Some choosing to go. Some have actually bounced around a couple of times within weeks. So I've been pondering why. There's always some churn. Yeah, we got that. That's just the nature of athletics, I think. But is it more than usual? And the Bleacher Report sort of says we're seeing the beginning of a major churn that'll going to last for a while as things resort. And they're blaming, and I tend to agree, that the current situation with NIL and the portal is making the head coaching job always a tough job, maybe the toughest it's ever been. And that may be the driver here. The pros, even though that's a high-pressure job, you got an owner to deal with, but it may be easier to be a pro head coach right now than to be a college head coach, especially in a large public with lots of people interested in what you're doing here, from the governor of the state you're in to your politically appointed board, to all the donors and fans out there, hundreds of thousands in some cases, looking to you as a head coach to be successful. I'm just interested in your perspective, John, yours, Andrew, as well. Andrew is a great observer of this sort of thing, too, in the football world. And I want you to speculate about how is this really just a ordinary thing right now with head coaching becoming a very nebulous thing, or is it something we're going to see more and more of as time goes on?
Well, I would think under the current landscape, we'll probably see more of this until until the dust settles, if you speak. I remember once talking to Skip Bertram, the former LSU baseball coach and AD over there. One of the things that Skip said, "Hey, just tell me the rules. As long as we all play by the rules, I'm fine with it. I just want to know what the rules are." Well, today, if you're in college football, you don't know the rules. So it's chaos out there. So if you're a coach that's trying to manage a process, just like you said, Doctor, you got to manage your roster. You got to keep your current people happy. You got to go recruit. You've got transfer portal. I mean, in the NFL, you've got a salary cap. You've got free agency rules. You've got draft rules. There's a sense of a process in there that everybody plays under the same set of rules. And it's not happening in college right now. And so I think, again, based on what's happened in Tennessee and West Virginia, that only complicates the matter further. So it's, again, if you're a coach at that level and somebody's calling you from the NFL and you said, look, it's a little bit more, I kind of know what I'm getting into there versus what I've got to do here. I certainly think you're going to see a lot more coaches certainly ponder that opportunity to make that move. And I wouldn't blame them.
Let me stay with Nick Saban, who went to the NFL and went to Miami. Does he see a similarity now in NCAA football becoming more of that NFL model? And I think you're seeing emerging. Jim Harbaugh at Michigan hired his brother's defensive and offensive coordinators from the Baltimore Ravens to be on that Michigan staff. And Jim Harbaugh coached San Francisco. Now he goes back to the NFL with the Chargers. I think we're seeing emerging more. It used to be, wow, Pete Carroll was at USC. Would he succeed? Well, he didn't succeed his first time. Didn't succeed with the Patriots his first time, but he sure succeeded in Seattle. Remember, there was always that talk. Frank Kush, it was a disaster going from Arizona State to the Colts. But I'm wondering if Nick saw that the NCAA is becoming, John, to your point, having to manage that organization more like the NFL, and he had a taste of that. Didn't want to do it on the NCAA level. I don't want to put words into it, but if there's anyone who could speak to it being very similar to the NFL, it would be someone like Nick Saban.
Yeah, and it's becoming like the NFL, but no rules. So, and if you're Saban, who's again is a very detailed and knows when the rules are done, no one probably utilizes the rules more in his favor or gets to a point to utilize them to best for his particular program than Nick Saban did. And now that's not there anymore. So it's again, I don't blame these guys from doing it. They've been doing it one way for forever. And I think, again, Nick can now go to television and sort of pontificate on it and see how that all goes for him. But I do think, again, right now it takes a certain breed of coach who's got the intestinal fortitude to understand you know what, there's a lot of stuff going on here, and how am I gonna manage this process, from, again, from recruiting, from drafting to the portal to all of the different headaches that they're dealing out there right now. And you've got to get a group of other coaches around you that are prepared to jump in the foxhole with you, hopefully create that culture, create a situation. Again, end of the day, these guys all want to win. They're all competitive. But again, you usually like to have a set of rules that you can all work around and agree to. And I think that's probably the underlying factor in a lot of this uncertainty and potential coaching movement.
And Dr. Loftin, to your point, you're seeing coordinators go from college to pros, and maybe it's a recruiting thing where they don't have to recruit 365 days, not just the players you're going to bring in, but having to recruit your own 85 every single day. Maybe the NFL becomes more attractive to them.
Well, the draft makes it somewhat easier. You've got a yearly draft. It's well-defined. You know who you can choose from. You know what your order is. That's all figured out for you, okay? No problems there. There's free agency to worry about, but that's a pretty small fraction of what's going on here. The salary cap, as John mentioned, has an impact on all of this. But again, you've got a small number of people, the owners, who make these decisions. And that's pretty well done. They talk to each other. They make a decision. They go forward. They may change from year to year a little bit, some of the rules, sure. But boy, look at college sports. Look at Missouri. Missouri just had its AD leave and head off to Arizona for less money and a lot of problems. And part of the rumor mill about this has been she did that because of all the players she had. She didn't hire the head coach there, who arguably is quite successful now. Drakewitz came from App State to Missouri. Started out kind of slow, like we all would probably, but has had great success this past year, but she didn't hire him. Okay. My understanding is he has direct connectivity to the board of curators there. So here's a football head coach, who's not listening to his boss, the AD, but really able to interact directly with the people who run the institution at the board level. And that probably made her unhappy. That's what I'm hearing anyway. And she got tired of that. The board created a committee to oversee athletics, to look at it, to make sure it's accountable. That just more dilutes your role as an AD. Looking forward to our guest today who can talk about being an AD. He comes from being a player to being a lawyer to being an AD and back to being a lawyer again. I think he can probably help shed light on that a little bit in our conversation today. But I think it's a very difficult time to be a head coach, to be an AD right now. Sure, the pay's good. Sarkisian just got a little raise, didn't he, John?
I believe so.
And that's puts him top 5 probably in the country right now in terms of his compensation right now. And we'll see where that goes, right?
Well, the NCAA also is now starting to, again, unintended consequences, right? That's my new podcast that I'm going to come up with. But they're thinking of moving the early signing period out of December, right? Doing it something in the summer. There has got to be a dead period in college football. There really isn't right now. Dr. Loftin, there is in the NFL. There's downtime in the NFL. There really hasn't been in college football. And John, to your point, with all the NFL, you know what the salary cap is because this is what the revenue is, and this is how we split it in our collective bargaining agreement. It's the Wild West still in the NCAA.
Yeah.
If we have NCAA, we don't really know. I mean, the NCAA is in deep doo-doo right now.
I should say college football. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Dr. Loftin. Yeah.
We don't know the future. I mean, right now they've got a leader who I think has great capability, but the damage they've done to themselves over the last decade is almost immeasurable. And they have such legal issues right now. There's several litigations in play. Our guest today can talk about that a bit more than we can probably. So I would hate to be in the job of the former Massachusetts governor moment here, trying to manage an organization which has really failed pretty miserably to do its job for several years now, and has brought itself to the brink of destruction almost, or at least of irrelevance. Maybe with the exception of a basketball tournament.
These are just a couple of topics. We have plenty more. And as Dr. Loftin referred to, our guest is Mike Perrin. We are very pleased to welcome Mike Perrin, an attorney with Winstead. He's also a distinguished alumnus, the University of Texas, where he was interim athletic director. He's a Hall of Famer, defensive end, linebacker at Texas. He's in the Hall of Honor as well. He joins us here on College Sports Follow the Money. Bowen, Jon, this is where I get out of the way. You can pepper Mike with questions now because I can't wait to hear what he has to say about how college sports is now.
Mike, I've got to ask this question up front here. I've been following the Tennessee/Virginia saga for a little bit now. It's been exciting to watch that. NCAA got a real hit from this judge the other day in Tennessee. How do you? I mean, I've read what it says, what the judge said about not only the decision to grant an injunction temporarily, but also the idea of how this looks like it runs afoul of any trust in terms of how our NCAA does this. Can you lay some groundwork here and give us your take on this particular important case for NIL?
Very, very glad to. It's an interesting opinion in its entirety. He goes through a number of the issues that are preliminarily involved that he has to decide before issuing his ruling. And then the wording of the ruling is very, very interesting. I'll come back to that in a minute, but it was certainly a bombshell thrown into the NIL world last week. I, like many people, subscribe to several different reporting services that keep up with all that. And reactions have ranged from this is the end of the NCAA as we know it, or as we might know it. It's a whole new world. And I frankly, I kind of agree with all of those things. The wording is very interesting. A couple of things. It appears to me, and I've seen confirmation of this from others, that it's nationwide in its effect. The time is unlimited until there's a final resolution in this case. And as we all know, many cases in litigation can go on for years, and certainly with appeals and all that. That raises a very interesting implication for collegiate sports. If these rules are all put aside for some period of time, then you start having recruiting cycles in all the various sports that are in the purview of the NCAA. So let's just say that it takes 2 to 3 years to try the case, and I have no idea what the docket situation is over there. I'm just speculating when I say that. Let's say some period of time, followed by an appeal to the Court of Appeals for that circuit. It's the kind of case that might grab the attention of the United States Supreme Court as well. When you consider the Alston opinion in June of 2021 and the very strong concurring opinion of Justice Kavanaugh, which many commentators read as saying, bring on the lawsuits, bring on the lawsuits. The NCAA is not above the law. But I mentioned the recruiting cycles because part of the justification for NCAA regulation and other sports groups is that they level the playing field so that when you do have a championship competition of some kind, you've roughly got people who got to that point through same or similar circumstances. Well, if recruiting is, if NIL supervision, regulation, whatever you want to call it, is totally suspended for several recruiting cycles, how do you ever correlate then teams that were recruited under no rules with maybe some rules will come into effect at some other time? I don't know. That's not really addressed in the decision, and I'm sure it's been considered, but recruiting is enough of a problem on its own without the NIL overlaying between early decision, football coaches just getting clobbered in December with visits. The transfer portal means you basically, like many industries, you've got to recruit your clientele daily for retention at the roster. So while it's a bombshell on its face, I think there's other implications that may flow from that, and I'm not sure. I do understand that NCAA President Baker issued a report yesterday. I've read several summaries about it, that they'll be meeting soon to decide on a response, but I haven't seen that letter itself or the memo. Perhaps y'all have. I have not.
And not yet either. I've heard about it. Baker has done some interesting things. His little discussion about D1 and how that might play out over time with segregating different kinds of schools was fascinating as well. And you can certainly react to that. I just think NIL has become such a big deal to us. The portal's a big deal to us, and the real shifting back and forth of how these rules play out here has made head coaching probably the most difficult jobs in the world now. Any thoughts about how this is going to really end up? Will it be a congressional issue? Will it be purely a judicial issue as far as resolving this in some way that provides stability for us all?
My crystal ball doesn't read that well on this, but to the first point you made, I was out in Las Vegas for the Sports Business Journal's Intercollegiate Athletics Forum on December the 5th, and that was the morning that President Baker released his letter at 6:51 a.m., if I remember correctly.
Yep.
I've not met him personally. I've seen him speak. I've been very impressed with him. Certainly, he had a very successful run as governor of Massachusetts, a Republican governor in a very predominantly Democratic state. I think it's no accident that letter was released at 6:51 a.m. on the day of that meeting. That was a bombshell thrown into that meeting. There were athletic directors and other administrators at that conference who were shaking their heads. How are we ever going to pay for this? Where will the money come from? What are the implications for Title IX? It was a very in-depth letter. Clearly very thoughtful. He's been on the job, I think, less than a year at this point. I believe he came in March of last year, if I remember correctly. And he gets high marks for meeting with the membership, continuing to be available. He kept his home in Massachusetts and has his predominant office there rather than Indianapolis. And certainly he and others have been very active lobbying Congress for a resolution of many of these issues in a way that would bring some sort of antitrust immunity to the collegiate sports enterprise. As an outside observer to that, I don't see that gaining a lot of traction right now. You've got the other cases pending out in California. The House case is set for trial next January of 2025. And the damage claims in that case, while I understand they're still being calculated and the expert witnesses have not finished their work on that, some of the people I read project the damages could be in excess of $4 billion if their antitrust damages are found and then trebled under the statute. In the last figures I saw, the NCAA had assets less than $1 billion. So. And don't forget, conferences are also parties to that litigation. So the landscape is filled with landmines, and we keep getting these hand grenades tossed into the foxhole. So it's a very, very, very changing time almost daily. I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago, and I told the people when I started, I said, I deliberately did not look at my news services this morning because what I'm about to tell you would be out of date probably if I'd looked at it in the last 3 or 4 hours. That's how rapidly things are changing.
All I can say is you have job security, sir.
There's a lot going on.
So, Mike, a question for you from a legal perspective. If, let's just say, football goes out and creates its own enterprise, and everyone gets to agree to that sort of model, does that take away some of the pressure on some of these legal things if those athletes become, employees, and does that impact Title IX if that's its own separate enterprise? Would love to get your thoughts on if that's a model that we're going to be heading to. Can we get there sooner to head off some of these other issues?
First of all, I think it's entirely possible that football could split off. If you look at the letter that President Baker wrote in December, he categorized schools by the sizes of their budgets and some of the indicia of independence there. I'm not saying he was predicting that, but certainly he did categorize programs by the size and their resources, and then propose some additional changes that would be based on those that were rich in resources. Title IX, I think if you've still got institutions that receive federal funds sponsoring a team, I don't think football breaking off on its own is going to remove a Title IX impact for other sports if they're at the same institution. I may be wrong about that, but that's my understanding of the implication of Title IX is if the institution receives federal funds, then you have application to all sports, not just those that have massive revenue. I would not be surprised to see an effort for some of the larger schools to, I'm not sure how they would do it, perhaps build on the CFP model and maybe have a larger base of teams that are doing that. I'm just not real sure. The NFL gets thrown back to me as hey, folks, that's 32 teams, and they seem to work it out and say, well, yeah. 32 or 64, a lot of the math works the same way, but I don't know. You've asked a great question, John, as you always do, and I don't know the answers at this point. I feel like we're kind of flying this plane while we're building it as we fly.
Mike, do you see the role and the qualifications for athletic directors changing?
I came to it from a different standpoint, so I'll be brief on that. I was a trial lawyer in Houston for 43 years, doing primarily civil litigation before I was asked to come serve as athletic director. I do think that I'm told by many athletic directors that they used to talk to their general counsel, once a month, something like that. And now they're talking multiple times a day. So I think the qualifications, I'll poke a little fun at myself. I had a few teammates from the 60s that thought that my job was to put on a pair of sweats and go to practices every day and watch all that. And certainly it's a fascinating job. I've got to say that I loved it. We had great people on the staff at UT, and they really helped me immensely for the almost 3 years I was there. It's a very demanding job. It really is. Just as being a head coach of football or men's or women's basketball, those are some of the high profile sports that it never stops. I was talking to one bowl director, an executive director of a bowl season a couple of weeks ago, and he told me that during December he kept 2 planes available on short notice. He didn't book them around the clock, but he had them available in the town where his bowl is played because the head coaches and several of the top assistants would be there preparing for the bowl and then have to fly out to meet with a recruit or some other aspect of recruiting and then turn around and fly right back. So anybody that thinks this is, the coaches are paid big salaries, but they earn every penny of it. And it's a hard job, as is being the athletic director. I think that certainly a legal background helped me immensely in that job. I think it's also draws on a broad business experience, and certainly, as everybody on this call can speak, the ability to perform in public under the scrutiny of television cameras and recordings, newspaper interviews, things like that. It's a very, very visible job at most institutions, and a very I'm going to use the word political in the sense that you have a lot of stakeholders. It's not political in an elective sense, but certainly trying to be able to correspond with your players, your coaches, faculty, donors, your governing board, whatever that form may be in. It's a busy office. It is.
To follow up a little bit there, Mike, you noticed obviously like I have that the former AD at Missouri had just left for a job in Arizona. She took a pay cut to do that.
Yes.
She is going to a place with obviously many challenges financially and otherwise going forward. And Missouri was a lot more flush with funds, shall we say, than Arizona was when she made this decision. And the rumor mill says that it was all because the involvement of her board of curators is called there, in athletics, which all of us who've led public institutions of consequence can tell you is real, very real. Can you comment on that aspect of it? I mean, in principle, the AD should be hired and fired objectively for all the reasons you just talked about in terms of their ability and background and so on. Yet, all of us who've done this job I have right now, and I'm sure the presidents and chancellors you've known tell you the same thing. In a public board, the opportunity for the board to engage with athletics in many levels is there and exploited. Can you maybe tell us a bit about your perspective on board involvement? You were an AD, okay, in a pretty political place. How can a AD really navigate that successfully?
Well, of course, the ability to navigate it and the means of navigation are going to change from institution to institution, and over time as the makeup of the governing board changes. I was fortunate to have regents and administrators that many of whom I knew from having been an active alum for many years. So I did not have a acclimation problem, and I was always I'm going to use the word short term. I was never going to be a permanent replacement. 3 years was the length of time that President Fenves and I talked about, and I ended up being there 3 years. Athletic director for 27 months, and then helped in the transition for another 9. I do think that someone wanting to be in the sports industry management, particularly as an athletic director, needs to have a number of skills, the ability to communicate, the ability to set priorities, the ability to get along with other people and understand their situation. I just think it's going to vary from place to place depending on the makeup of the board, the other administrators, and how active they may be. Some regents at the University of Texas system were more interested in athletics than others, but I suspect that's true of most governing boards. It would probably be a weakness of an institution to have everybody all focused on the same principal activities. I think communication is just a key to it, and of course there's also a great aspect of accountability to that position. There's only one athletic director. Things have to be approved or disapproved. The buck stops there. And of course, the presidents watch that very closely because of institutional control issues. They want to make sure that good people are taking care of business. I really can't speak to the particulars of the Missouri situation or the Arizona situation with her change. I did read, I believe Desiree is an alumnus of Arizona and had some
law school.
Yes,
law school.
That's right. Had some personal ties that perhaps were of interest. I haven't spoken to her about that, but it was an interesting move. It was an interesting move with the budget problems out there and all that. It'll be a challenge.
Well, I hear there's an opening in Texas somewhere for an AD right now. Have you thought about perhaps changing again?
My wife tells me about 4 times a day, Mike, this is a good time to not be the athletic director. So. It's a busy office everywhere. It is. It really is.
So, Mike, you've got a unique perspective. Certainly being a student athlete back in the day, seeing how the industry was handled back then being at Texas during a time of turmoil too. You could equate to that something what the NCAA we're doing on a more of a national scale right now. As someone who has a passion for this area, what are some things that again, not necessarily lead, but what are things that the industry should be doing right now to try to certainly protect itself, but also, again, if we've got to make changes, it seems like certainly there's going to be judicial or congressional pressure to do that. What should be some of the things that the industry should be looking at right now? If you had 30,000 feet and could be, head of this global enterprise at some point.
Well, couple of aspects to your question there. Undoubtedly, there will be additional input from the judiciary. The cases in California are, if I recall correctly, there's 3 that are pretty active in the Northern District of California right now. The House case that I mentioned, and 2 others. There's another one in Oregon. I'm forgetting the particulars on right now, but you also have then the employment issue that's out there with the Dartmouth basketball team. I believe they'll be certified for or voting for representation next week. And there's that other employment case out in California. I'm not sure anybody has the luxury right now of taking just a 30,000-foot view with everything that's happening, because you do, as I mentioned earlier, you have seasons, you have cycles, you have obligations to play the games and reach for the championships and all of that. They happen on an annual basis. So it's there's never a chance to hit the pause button. I do think that the everybody, and I'm talking to myself as well, everybody needs to realize that change is afoot. I would have people come up and ask me, let's go back to the Southwest Conference, or let's go back to this. And you just never go back. You just don't. And that's probably a good thing. Change is pretty constant. The welfare of the student athletes is paramount to my mind, as one thing that has to be a factor for everybody. And I mean that as physical health, but also mental health and the abilities to perhaps educate the students as you go along about life after sports. Many groups have written about that and talked about it. It's real. I remember when I could no longer play football, there was a loss of identity, just a feeling of emptiness. Football had run my life for 10 years on an annual basis at that point, and it was just different. Everything I've read indicates that all universities are going to face a drop-off in applications starting, I believe it's next year or the year after, because of declining birth rates, 18 years ago or so. And so there may be budget issues that are not really on the forefront of every school right now. University of Texas, very fortunate. Texas A&M, very fortunate. Many others that have resources at an alumni base that can contribute money. But when you read the segregation by budgets that President Baker did, you realize that 1,100 schools in the NCAA, there's a very small number that have those kind of resources. And I think you also cannot take all of those streams of revenue and resources for granted. NIL, people have suspected for several years that NIL will dilute donations and perhaps media rights, sponsorships, things like that, if people want to put money directly into NIL efforts as opposed to a charitable contribution. So I think caution, while you're running the train every day, you better be thinking ahead, hey, what's on the track out ahead of me? And I say that with a smile on my face. It never stops. It never stops. It just doesn't. You've got something. I told people with 500 student athletes, it was like having 500 nieces and nephews. Something was going on somewhere all the time.
Mike, we've talked about the NCAA. We've talked about schools, boards, things like that, but we haven't talked a lot about the student athlete themselves. I'm not sure if your practice encompasses working with students themselves, trying to negotiate contracts and such, but do you think our student population who plays athletics kinds of activities in their schools, are they equipped to be really clever and very effective in negotiating? Can they deal with NIL revenues appropriately? Where do the lawyers fit? Where do the agents fit? How does this really look if you were a student athlete today trying to figure it all out and not get screwed and also not be rewarded and somehow squander that reward because you're not equipped?
I think the truthful answer to that is it's going to vary all over the waterfront. About 25% of the students that were at the University of Texas when I was athletic director were the first in their family to attend college, and I think that's generally true at most larger institutions. And I say that first of all, it's a wonderful opportunity. Students come in, they perhaps didn't know they would have the opportunity to get a college education. They do, they thrive. And that's a lift for several generations of that family. That scholarship can impact the current player's earnings, ability of his family to or her family to get an education, progress, and all that. It's a wonderful opportunity, but most first generation students don't have a mother or a dad or an uncle or a grandfather or somebody that is skilled in business to talk to about the issues you raise. And certainly taxes, that's got to be on the forefront. Setting priorities of building a brand and things like that. I'm encouraged that President Baker and others are talking about letting the schools be more active and encouraging the schools to be more active in providing access to advisors, counselors, perhaps those that can guide them on building a brand, because many students are going to be able to parlay their NIL into whatever their next career is. You read about people who want to play pro ball, but then go into broadcasting, for instance. And it's every bit as much a learning experience as an internship is to a health professional. To me, it's allowing somebody to be a self-employed individual business person at a very young age, but they need help. They can't do it by themselves. And most of those courses or needs that you and I are talking about are not taught in high school. So I think that colleges and universities, the NCAA, everybody that's involved in the intercollegiate sports enterprise needs to focus on helping the students not only get a deal, but how to handle the deal, meet their obligations, and progress as a self-employed businessman.
Because we have to keep the student, the academic side as well. Because if we break away, and again, all this is hypothetical, we break away in just 4 years and there's the dream of the NFL and that doesn't materialize, then we have a student athlete that isn't prepared. We're preparing them with able to keep them healthy, mental health. Now it's going to be, to your point, Mike, we can do that with financial help, things like that. We can't take the scholarship away, can we? Because then we have 4 years of football players who aren't prepared for what's next. And then it's almost like an empty dream, but it's hard to tell an 18-year-old what you knew 10 years after playing football, right? It's hard to tell them, but we've got to get that message to them, don't we?
Well, I think we do. And, other societies have dealt with mandatory military service for 2 years or things like that. 18 to 22, 23 in there, that's just an incredible time. You think you're mature physically, you're not, you're still growing. We know the brain changes into the early 20s. I think we have to focus on the need for continued education, and yet, I was 18 once. It's hard to maintain the level of interest and effort on all fronts when you're that age. It just is. But I think we have to focus on that.
Mike, thank you for the knowledge, your time, and joining us. Now we have an email. It's collegesportsftm@gmail.com. I have a feeling we're going to get some emails. So can we get back to you for more answers?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. One of the joys I've had in getting back into the athletic world is the conversations that happen. And, it's part of it. So feel free to reach out anytime. And I'm honored, John, that you reached out to me, and certainly pleasure to visit with all three of you today, and just look forward to continuing the conversation.
Our thanks to Mike Perrin for joining us, and more things to talk about. When he said being on the track and looking ahead, my feeling is right now it's that train's going down the track and everything's a reaction. Oh, what did we just hit? Oh, wait, what did we? At some point, we got to turn that light on and start looking down that track for sure.
Yeah, what I appreciated by him was, again, as a former student athlete, as an athletic director at Texas when they were going through turmoil, to see what's happening with the NCAA right now, I certainly thought he had some very good perspectives on again, what are things that are happening to us now and why they're happening. But I think, again, to the degree, what are we going to do to get out of this, and how do we get it fixed, and how soon can we get it fixed, so that there is some, again, that this enterprise is not damaged irreparably.
I have a vision, guys. My vision is that Jon Heidtke will come out and solve every problem. Every problem. We can all go home and watch football.
That's right. A&M in Texas on Thanksgiving night.
Yep. Can't wait.
I have an old friend of mine who I worked with in Orlando, David Steele, who's a Hall of Famer, and he always said, "Hey, just cue me." Okay, just cue me. But again, thanks to Mike. Jon, thank you for setting that up. Dr. Loftin, fantastic questions to him, because I know there's so many mutual friends, but just a wonderful addition to this College Sports Follow the Money podcast to have that kind of expertise join us. It was fantastic for sure.
And I got a feeling he's going to be a friend of the program, and we can have Mike on from time to time to help us continue to give his legal perspective on the challenges that the industry is running into.
There's no lack of things to talk about, guys.
Yeah,
absolutely not. We will do this again, and we invite your comments and your questions, collegesportsftm@gmail.com. Before we take off, our thanks to Dalton Hughes for producing this podcast. For Dr. R. Bowen Loftin, for Jon Heidtke, I'm Andrew Monaco. We thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.